Welcome everyone to Buddha's Center. It's Sunday and wonderful that we can talk about Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. Such an important book. We're so fortunate to have translated into 3 volumes in English, now in the Shambhala publications. And then over here, you see the actual Tibetan of it. That's just one book. And it's amazing that I still have this edition. One of the nuns at Jayan Choling Nunnery back in 2000 gave me their copy of the Lamrim Chemo. And Jayan Choling Nunnery is very connected to Rinpoche because he taught them when he lived in Dharamsala as senior teacher and then abbot of the Dalai Lama's monastery, Namgyal. And some of those students are in the first graduating class of women to achieve the Geshe Ma degree. And one of those students that was Rinpoche's student that studied with him up to Parshin Geshe Mala Tenzin Ladrinla is the person who connected me and now us, many of us, with Geshe Dorje Damdu. So it's amazing to see how all of these connections end up producing amazing results, and how we're also karmically connected and can help support each other spiritually because of this. And Rinpoche really produced so many great practitioners and scholars, especially in India, where we see the Geshes and Geshe Mas that were truly affected by Rinpoche's teachings and his clear and precise presentation of very complex topics. And his kindness to be able to teach to whatever scope the practitioner needed to be taught at. And that was what was so amazing about Rinpoche. The nuns shared with me that he used to say, slowly, slowly, you'll understand this. He used to, he was teaching the collected topics, the first topics and so forth within, the study of debate. And he was so patient with them, he said that they shared with me, and some other monks shared with me that he was just so patient, and his only agenda was making sure that you had clarity around whatever the subject was that you were requesting to be taught at that time. And so I just rejoice in the work that Khyentse Geshe Wandak did with us, but also did with others. And we're seeing the ripening results of the work that he did with others on us, and hopefully on all sentient beings once we really, really practice these things and fulfill our needs and all sentient beings' needs by becoming Buddhas. So I just wanted to make sure that I don't think I hold this book up enough so that participants can see what this treasure I'm talking about looks like, and when you get it, feels like in your hands. And it's a very special series of books that I can assure you will help you to understand the concise teachings of Lord Buddha in a way that's very profound, and will quickly allow you to understand what the meaning of things are that seemed kind of obscure and vague without it. And I'm not saying this is the only way to understand Lord Buddha's teachings. That would be absurd if I posited something like this. But in terms of effect on my mind, effect on my understanding of the Buddha Dharma, this has had, the most profound impact on me from a literature perspective. Not that I haven't read so many other books, but in terms of if I say one thing I have to run out of the house with, if I can only take one and the house is on fire, we have conversations like this, when you have so many holy books and holy objects in a home. And I always land on, no matter how much, the Indian Pandits, how much of this I do, I land on, I'm running out of the house with the Lamrim Chemo. And I can run out with 3 in English in this game because it's one book. So this is how I feel personally about the texts that we talk about every Sunday and that Rinpoche talked about for so many years. I really feel this deeply connected to it and feel that it's this valuable in terms of humans, beings, spiritual evolution. So before we go any further into the Lamrim Chemo, let's get into the 7-point Vairocana posture, a posture we always get into to try to get our minds into a place where they're healthy and not kind of crowded and corrupted. And healthy meaning open, open to receiving the information that's so amazing that all these holy lamas are so kind to present to us over and over again. So I just feel fortunate to be here on Sunday to discuss this with you. And let's get into this posture. I have to take a drink. I'm sorry. Luckily, I have someone who cares very much for me. I'm quite dehydrated from food poisoning. So I was being urged to drink. And then my mind was saying, why are you disrupting this important thing I'm doing, which I could pass out in the middle of if I'm not hydrated. So thank you very much, Lorinda, for caring more sometimes than I do about my well-being. Okay. What was I saying about calming the mind down? Okay, so let's get into the 7-point Vairocana posture. And like we do, because it's so conducive to getting to a place of clarity, or at least conducive to seeing if we're anywhere near the place we need to be in order to do effective meditation that will really change our minds, that will really have an impact and keep us coming back for more because we know that that impact means something. So 7-point Vairocana posture, and let's focus on the breath, the breathing in and out and the counting of the breath. And then imagine in the front of us, as we do in this case, front generation form of Buddha Shakyamuni, beautiful and radiant, about an arm length away, eye height about the size of the thumb. Static, though. You want to make sure that when you do single pointed or fixed meditation, there's two kinds of meditation, fixed meditation and analytical meditation. When you do fixed meditation, you want to make sure that your object, if you're using a front image, if you're trying to meditate on something in the front and hold it, stays static and isn't animated. So this is the kind of form of the Buddha Shakyamuni in this case, or whatever other object of observation you use for your own single pointed or calm abiding practice. That's wonderful. Use whatever works best for you. But from a Buddhist perspective, if you can choose, this to stay, with one holy being as your object, it allows you to accumulate merit and also connect your mind to that being you will become in terms of perfect realizations. So there's always a way to make our practice connect more to our goals, connect to more sentient beings. And if we are able to do that, our practice becomes very, very effective and becomes something that transforms our mind in a swift way. So we're always trying to take every practice that we're doing and seeing how we can enhance it and seeing how it really in the long run will help us to become a Buddha, help us to get rid of the afflictive obstructions and the obstructions to omniscience that if we are who we appear to be, have, and keep us from having complete freedom from suffering and bliss. So the more we can do to connect with that desired result, the more we're helping ourselves to evolve into the kind of spiritual holy being that we wish to become. And not spiritual holy because these are fancy words, spiritual holy because that means in this case that we never have to suffer again. We will be the most reliable guides in the universe. And while we're being so reliable with so much love and compassion, we'll only experience bliss. Even though we see someone suffering, will experience bliss because we know that we have a true solution to their problem and know exactly how to intervene. We won't feel so handicapped and just so let down again and again and again with our incapacity to truly, truly help. So it's just amazing when we think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what eventually will happen. And what are some of the signs that while we're doing it, it's being, producing the results that it should. And if we can get our minds calm enough and we know the literature well enough, we'll have a mirror to look at in terms of the scripture to know whether or not our minds are operating in a way that tallies with reality, and they'll be calm enough to really be honest with ourselves about it. Okay, so breathing in and out and counting, front generation form of Buddha Shakyamuni, 7-point Vairocana posture. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We're so fortunate to be here today, looking at the section in the Great Treatise on the Stage of the Path to Enlightenment on the teachings shared in common with beings of medium capacity, where we find the unveiling of the Four Noble Truths. We find the unveiling of the real condition that we're all in. We find the unveiling of why we're in this condition that we're all in, and the fact that we don't need to be in this condition that's so plagued with dissatisfaction and suffering. And we're told there's a way, and a very precise way, to end the suffering, because we know how it was brought about, and we know how to stop what brings it about. We're so fortunate Buddha Shakyamuni came to this world almost 2,600 years ago to show us this teaching at the first turning of the wheel of Dharma that we find presented in this section on the medium scope. Incredible on the truth of suffering, origin, cessation, and path. Just a clear presentation with an expanded presentation of origin in terms of the 12 links of dependent origination. Rejoice in the fact that we have this information, and that surrounded by this medium scope section, we find the beautiful introduction, small scope section, and right after it, the incredible section that shows us how to take this understanding of the Four Noble Truths and combine it with bodhicitta and truly, truly understand emptiness in the calm abiding and special insight section. We're so blessed. We don't have anything missing in terms of information that we need from an outside perspective. And we don't have anything missing from an internal perspective because we have a mental consciousness that's in the nature of clear light and unsullied and can be transformed into a perfect omniscient state. So we have the mental consciousness that can evolve 100%. We have this. We have the pure Dharma that we can read and then put into practice so it can evolve. So we have nothing missing. We have the pure teachers who can teach us how to understand the pure Dharma. There's nothing missing. The only thing we have to do is put this into practice on a daily basis. We're so fortunate. We do so many things in life to try to achieve small little results. We think that they're so important. But if we weigh those things that we run after day and night against having permanent freedom from suffering and permanent bliss, these things start to seem so silly. And they'll only start to seem so silly if we start to see a kind of truth that is accurate. I mean, truth is always accurate, but we think that something is true all the time. that isn't. So we have to reverse that kind of misunderstanding, and we can do so because we have these holy texts. So now imagine that Buddha Shakyamuni, who was static, now kind of transforms into the animated form that you imagine when you're imagining the merit field. Unless you're doing a fixed meditation, you're imagining the merit field animated as actual holy beings in front of you that are just right there, just a couple arm lengths or however far, a prostration, full body prostration away. They're just right there in the space in front of you, in three-dimensional animated full form. You sometimes imagining them debating, imagining them having conversations, imagining them saying, wow, Jeff is finally doing what we've all had in mind. We've only wanted to see every single being achieve freedom from suffering and bliss. And now, I'm imagining that they're seeing, me doing something about what they came here to tell me, to do something about. So I'm imagining how just happy if I, only had one thing in mind for someone, and then suddenly they started doing it out of nowhere. And they, I kept telling, I had this thing in mind for them, and they just weren't doing it. They weren't doing it over and over and over again. And then suddenly I see out of the corner of my eye, whatever this thing is, that they're doing it in the exact way. And the only thing I cared about was to get them to do this thing. And now I imagine from my side that this person that, I've been just trying to encourage with all these skillful ways to do something is now doing it. Imagine how I would then feel, this sense of satisfaction that I would then feel. And we turn that to the merit field, and we think about the fact that enlightened beings only come here to teach us the truth of suchness. And now, for once in so many lifetimes, many times we've done it, but just now is the once we're doing what they care for us to do. Imagine now reversing that feeling that you have. Imagine, all you've cared about day and night is having someone get something and they finally do. Now you imagine that the holy enlightened beings are seeing us here doing this, seeing me here doing this. In my personal case, you can't get enlightened and then it makes me enlightened. This is all about our own personal journey, our own personal evolution. So I just imagine, what would these beings think if finally, after all of these lives, I'm actually to speak about the Dharma? This is amazing. So speaking about the Dharma, Lai ge dan lu dan no jing ge rubun da dan mi ge nan dan ro wa gun ji jan nan ji zang ba dan je ge du da ji ju den do. In the language of gods, nagas, and yaksas, in the language of demons and of humans too, in however many kinds of speech there may be, I shall proclaim the Dharma in the language of all. So now with that instruction being said about personalizing the merit field, how you think, a being would feel seeing someone who's finally starting to get it. So you're looking into the eyes of these holy beings and imagine them, they have this love. They've always had this compassion. They've always been looking down on you and spontaneously wanting to help and doing everything that they can to try to help. And finally, all of their work is paying off. So this is the feeling you have about the holy beings in the space in front of you. Imagining Buddha Shakyamuni so animated and so happy. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we see right behind me, courtesy of Mzula Geshe Aga. Thank you so much. Imagining Khenser Geshe Wandak, who so many of us knew, who spent decades with us trying to help us learn how to evolve our minds, how to do the stuff that I was talking about, connect with the Dharma in a big way, make your motivation large enough to produce swift results. Imagine how happy Khenser Geshe Wandak would be. I look back on film of the last years of his life, And you see him looking over as because he was asking me to teach at the end of his life. He'd say, you teach, and I'd look over and I'd see him happy. And you see in the video, he's just so happy to see the Dharma being presented, being carried on. So I have such a video, I have tangible thing that I can look at and see what this being in the merit field would look like, looking at me with so much, just like proud to see somebody who was just so screwed up, change, so definitely changed. Now imagining Geshe Lobsang Gompo, another one of my teachers who taught me debate, one of Rinpoche's students, incredibly holy Lama, Geshe Lobsang Gompo, and imagining Dema Loche Rinpoche, we have such a connection with. I received the 5 great text transmission from Dema Loche Rinpoche. We say these names, so I'm just letting you know why we say these names. He was the abbot before Rinpoche of Namgyal Monastery, considered one of the greatest scholars ever, very good friends with Rinpoche. And just a quick story, because I love to share stories. I went to Dharamsala and Rinpoche said, oh, look up Dema Loche Rinpoche. And this is when I was young. And I didn't know about, like, people were important. I didn't understand that so much. So getting into Dema Loche Rinpoche then was very, very hard. You needed appointments and you needed this and that. So of course I went to his house and said, I'm here. I'm Khensa Geshe Wandok's student, and I'm here to see you, and he's bring him right in. And I don't even know what a big deal this is. Most of the time in my life, in my younger days, I didn't know what a big deal things were. So I'm in the room and he's sharing his fruit with me and telling his attendants to get me tea and asking me about Rinpoche and asking me what Rinpoche is teaching. And I told him Rinpoche was teaching the Heart Sutra. And then he said, oh, well, what do you know about the Heart Sutra? So it was quite a long exchange. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I feel like I was in his room for an hour, not knowing what to deal with this. Fast forward, it's like a month and a half later, I'm in Drepung and, learning debate, with the other 10-year-olds. Really doing a good job against the 10-year-olds, feeling great about myself. And all the monastery stops suddenly because this Lama shows up to give a transmission of the 5 great texts, the 5 great texts of the Pramanavartika Karika by Dharmakirti, the Abhisama Alamkara by Lord Maitreya, the Madhyamika Avatara by Chandrakirti, the Abhidharma Kosh by Basubandhu, and the Vinaya, Duodotsawa, the root Vinaya, Gunaprabha. So he came to give the complete transmission of all of those texts, and thousands of people came. And I thought to myself, I see. So when I say Dema Loche Rinpoche, here's a little story to kind of connect you to this great, incredible being. And Jeffrey Hopkins did an immense amount of work with him in Virginia. And yes, if you ask around, he was one of the greatest. And Jeffrey Hopkins was just saying the other day, just how sharp his mind was and just how incredibly clear he taught. And also how deaf he was, that he had to, when he translated for him, put in some earplugs at times because he spoke so loud that being right next to him was so loud. So it's nice to be able to share these real life stories when I say, oh, in Dema Loche Rinpoche, this is who we're talking about. And Geshe Lobsang Gompo would, teach us, and he'd see somebody with a book on the floor and he'd get off his throne and he'd pick it up and say, no, don't put the Dharma on the floor in the middle of a teaching. This is the spiritual these spiritual thoroughbreds that we have in our family. And then I say Khensa Lobsang Gyatso. This was someone who was the abbot of Losaling. When I was there, I became very close with, who came and gave Manjushri initiation at the Chen Rezig Center, and who is, you can look up, just considered an incredible Larampa Geshe. Just really, really evolved. And when he finished his being abbot of Losaling, I just recently read an interview with him. His Holiness said he was so happy that he really did such a good job. And yeah, we're so fortunate to have these beings. Okay, so imagine now all the beings of the, so you're imagining other holy beings, Geshe Dorje Damdu, imagining Geshe Umzala Geshe Aga and Geshe Malatenzen Ladra and Jeffrey Hopkins and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, any being you considered an enlightened being in space in front of you. But please imagine them in the way I'm saying, personally connected to you. Even if it's just a name I'm telling you about, now you have a little story. Feel that personal connection, that's through lineage to you, from me, from Rinpoche, from Trijung Rinpoche, etc., from these holy beings, Ling Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now it's landing in your ears for you to do something about, for you to do something with. We're so fortunate. Imagining the extensive deeds lineage passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Lord Maitreya and Asanga and Vasubandhu and Dharmakirti and Dignaga, Muktasena and Haribhadra and Shakyaprabha and Gunaprabha, Atisha and Lama Salimpa. Imagining the profound view lineage passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Manjushri and Nagarjuna and Buddhapalita and Arya Deva and Chandrakirti and Shanti Deva and Chandrashita and Baba Vega, Kamala Shila, all these holy beings. Imagining again Lama Salimpa and Atisha. Now imagining the lineage of blessings passed down from Lord Vajradhara to Saraha and Machipa and Tilopa and Naropa, Lotsawa Marpa and Milarepa and Gampopa, all these holy beings, imagining that Lord Atisha is passing down the Lamrim lineage to Drone Tompa and all of those holy teachings, imagining the old Kadampa lineage, the three old Kadampa lineage beings, the holy beings from the Nyingma, Padma Baba, Sakya Shingokonga Nimpo, Sakya Pandita, imagining the Kaji lineage, the Karmapas, the Galupa lineage, all of those holy beings, Lama Tsongkhapa, Kirtapje, Jelsapje, Panchen Sanandrapa, Basuchuji Jetson, Jayan Sheba, Jayan Sheba, Gonju Jimmy Wambo, Janja Ruby Dorje, the seventh Dalai Lama, imagining Jetson Chuji Jetson, Purbajok, all of the holy beings and all of these, lineages that we're so connected to, and from the various monasteries, the various textbook authors, and so forth, that commented on such profound things that we're able to understand them. These are the beings that commented on the things that then Rinpoche studied and then Rinpoche taught to us, and we're able to understand them. And many, many of these authors that I speak about have their texts, because of the kindness of the UMA translation group and so forth, translated into English. And I really beg you all to search out all of these texts and all of these authors' names. So, go back and rewind the video and listen to each of these names and find out, what did they do? What did they say? What did they write? How does it relate to the Lam Rim tradition? And you're going to be amazed at what you find. So now imagining all the highest Yoga Tantra deities, performance Tantra deities, action Tantra deities, all of the 35 Buddhas, imagining all of the Dharma protectors, they're all in the space in front of you. Now imagine that you're sharing this delightful moment with all sentient beings, that you're creating connections today with every single sentient being in the universe. Just saying, I want to connect to every single sentient being in the universe, every being that needs to still evolve to the state of Buddhahood. I want to connect with them, so that if they become Buddhas before I do, they can help me. And if I become Buddhas before they do, I can help all of them. So I'm connecting with every single sentient being in the universe, not only because of this great altruistic motivation, but as an insurance plan. So imagine that you're connecting with every single sentient being in the universe and bringing them here to hear the Dharma, just as you're here today to hear the Dharma, to get rid of your afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience. And now imagine you're sharing with these beings the secret that you know right now. And many, many lifetimes before, you might have known it a little. And you could, with some sort of luck because of this connection, if you don't do anything more, know about it again in the future. But you know about it now, and the time to practice it is now. And the time for all sentient beings to practice is now. So imagine that every being, hell, hungry, ghost, animal, human, demigods, and gods, are brought here by you. You're sharing this experience with them, sharing this moment with them, just in case at this moment in their lives, they aren't at the place where they have this truth. Imagine that you're being generous and you're just caring so much. You want them to be free from suffering, just like you. You want them to be happy, have happiness, just like you want. And just imagine you're sharing this with all sentient beings, while you're imagining this amazing kind of attitude that connects to every being. Recognize that you are empty of inherent existence. This amazing thought is empty of inherent existence, and all sentient beings are empty of inherent existence. So you say, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. This thought to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings is empty of inherent existence. May I am empty of inherent existence, for all sentient beings are empty of inherent existence. So this is the motivation, how we have this method and wisdom that we can kind of unite at some point with the higher practices. Okay, so before we read anything else, I just like to read a little bit from Meditation on Emptiness by Jeffrey Hopkins. Before we read the Heart Sutra, it's important to know what the Heart Sutra is talking about. And the Heart Sutra doesn't really spell it out, unfortunately. It's quite vague, even though it's being very specific. What it's being specific about is hard to understand. So luckily, we've had kind lamas come. We've had all these Indian pandits write commentaries. And now we have, texts in English because of, incredible beings like Jeffrey Hopkins, books like Meditation on Emptiness, that we can read to start to understand how we would meditate on the only thing that will end cyclic existence. Is this meditation? It's the only thing. It starts to be really, well, I'm really just drawn to love and compassion. Well, that's okay, but you won't be able to really have it unless you understand have emptiness. It's pretty wild. And all the love and compassion in the world won't get you to be able to end cyclic existence, won't get you to be able to be a Buddha alone. So you have to have this wisdom to even develop real love and compassion. But without this wisdom, you can't become enlightened in the Hinayana vehicle or the Mahayana vehicle. This exact wisdom, not a portion of the wisdom, this whole wisdom. You can't just understand selflessness of person, of an autonomous substantial reality, and think that just this understanding of selflessness of person is the understanding of emptiness and will cut the root of cyclic existence. You have to see the emptiness of all phenomena, the emptiness of inherent existence of all phenomena. And in order to establish that you know what that is, because we usually believe the opposite, we believe at all times that things have objective inherent intrinsic existence. They appear to us that way. In order to develop this kind of shift in attitude, it's going to take us identifying what an inherent existence that we think it is would need to have. What would it need to have in order for it to be there? So we've been going through this text so far and looking at the various points that are made. And that's first, that when we're meditating on emptiness, we have to establish what the object of negation is. What is this self we're negating in terms of selflessness? It's not the existence of a self. When we look at prasangika, maybe the existence of a way we think a self is, but it's not negating the self's existence. Jeff is talking to you right now. There's a person here right now. It's just the way that the person talking to you right now appears to me as kind of this one thing until I start to pay attention to it, more so. When it just nakedly is appearing to me, it appears inherently existence as this one substance that's, the mind and body are kind of mixed with this I, and I'm moving my hands and I'm talking, and I feel like this very, kind of independent, autonomous thing that can, as the great Geshes would say, could stand up by itself. I'll explain that more in a minute. So this I we're identifying, we're seeing how first it naturally appears. We're seeing that it naturally appears as this really solid thing, as a concrete thing. Not when we start to analyze how it's appearing, just how it's naturally appearing. I just feel like Jeff, I just feel it, we're feeling this natural appearance, and we're seeing, like, when we're scared, all of a sudden we feel it all, we feel it all the way from our toe to our top of our head, right? Jeff, scared. Jeff has been called on when I'm in a class and don't really know the answer, and then the, pride, the grass, this inflation of I, starts to take off. I start to be able to see it. So in life, as we're going about life, we start to be able to very easily, in its natural occurring state, be able to identify this I that we believe to operate in a certain way. So we have to kind of start with the thing we think and know exactly what it is, and then pick it apart to see if it is what it is. So we're trying to find out, in the case of the Prasangika view, if there's anything findable from the object's own side to say that it inherently exists. Because if it's not autonomous, if it's not independent, we can't say it inherently exists, because it depends. True existence, inherent existence, true establishment, these are all synonyms or equivalents in the Prasangika system, along with a lot of other ones. We don't make a distinction. Well, it could be not truly existent, but it could be intrinsically existent. Prasangika says this all means the same thing. All these words you're talking about, even when you talk about like a sprout and a seed, and you establish the dependent origination of cause and effect that a farmer does, Tsongkhapa says, guess what? You just showed there's no autonomous existence. You just shown dependence. The farmer knows stuff, but just establish that it's not inherently existent by way of a sign. That's not the final sign of how we say in Prasangika, the high dependent origination of mere imputation. But you can see it doesn't have autonomy. Right from a seed makes a sprout. The sprout has no autonomy. Then the sprout makes the vegetable or whatever, right? There's no autonomy. You see how this this comes from meeting with that, like this is arising in dependence upon that. So this occurrence is happening, and there's no findability or autonomy or substantial existence from an object's or in terms of, self of phenomena side or self of person side. So this is what we're trying to, get to the point of understanding. But how do we understand that? We have identified this thing that we feel is whole. Then we next looked at, asserting selflessness follows from a reason. So if it's selfless, if it has selfhood, it has a true self, then it should be findable. Nagarjuna, precious garland. If the mirage that's appearing as water from those afar, were water, those nearby should see the water. So if the I that's appearing naturally from afar, without investigation, should be very loud and findable. If it's something that's not like a mirage, should be able to find it within its parts or outside its parts. You should be able to find it within the mind and body or something separate from the mind and body. So this is the investigation the yogi starts to get into. Is it something one with or separate from? If it's not one with or separate from, if it's not inherently one with or separate from, it can't be inherently existent. So we started to talk about that. And then we got into this idea of the sevenfold point analysis of a chariot. So we talked about the four essentials in terms of identifying the object of negation, seeing if the object is one with its parts, separate from its parts, and then realizing that if it's not inherently one with or separate from its parts, then the object is necessarily not inherently existent. So we started to see how we could, come up with what an inherent existence would have to have. Okay, so we say this thing feels to me inherently existent. So then we say, okay, does that tally with reality? What would it need to have? It'd have to be one with its parts or separate with its parts. It'd have to be one with its mind or body or and body or separate from it. It has to be findable. The mirage is water. You have to get close to it and find water. So this is what they're talking. This is what Nagarjuna is talking about when he's talking about mirages and water and Geshe Dorje Damdu brings this up a lot, and Rinpoche brought this up a lot too. These about, trying to establish the object of negation and appearances tallying with reality, and then finding that you never find anything autonomous, that's separate from the mere designation of thought on a basis of designation. He said that a million times. You just have a mere collection that serves as a basis of designation for a name. I mean, 1,000 times at least he said that. And we see that we won't find anything that can stand up. So what did I mean by stand up? I heard so many, Rinpoche gave this example. I recently heard Geshe Palden Drapa Rinpoche give this example about if an object has inherent existence, objective existence, it should be able to stand on its own. Independently, it should be able to find it somehow, be able to find it there, be able to stand on its own. So for instance, if someone's legs don't work, they require one person on one arm, another person on another arm to stand up. So the standing up, that person can't autonomously on their own stand up by themselves. They require this and that to do getting up. So, does the self of person, self of phenomena, able to stand up by itself? Or does it require support? I love this idea. It really gives you something to work with that's tangible, Does this shoe just stand on its own? Why does my dog think it's a toy and I think it's a shoe? Does the shoe stand on its own? This is what we start to ask. So if it did, there are 7 ways that you can really, really look at. Is it one with its parts or separate from its parts? And it's called the 7-point analysis. And we'll just read a little bit of it. Because I do want to get into more than just this. But I'm kind of feeling like we're on a roll with meditating on emptiness in a way that is effective. And I don't want to stop that flow either. So the 7-fold reasoning is brief. I do not inherently exist because. So now we're seeing if the I stands up by itself. And the assertion here is that it's not going to. You're starting with this, it doesn't inherently exist because. So you would say the subject, I, if we were looking at a syllogism, right? Subject I, predicate, is not inherently existent because of not being found among the 7 possibilities, if you will. 7 ways it could be. So this is you're using these 7 as ammunition against inherent existence. Oh, is it like this? Oh, does it inherently exist like that? Oh, does it inherently exist like that? And then you exhaust all ways, or many ways. There's more exhausting to do, but you exhaust many ways that a thing could inherently exist and find out it's not tenable. But then through dependent origination, you understand that things exist subjectively through mere designation of thought, and that you can't erase the shoe. You just have to erase the way you think the shoe is abiding because it appears to be abiding objectively existent. And the shoe's not such a problem, but the biggest object of our attachment, fill in your own blank, when we think that objectively exists and stands up by itself, that allows for us to really overvalue it. And that's what we're trying to undo, this overvaluing of things that don't have the value. We're giving it to them. We think they're giving it to us. We're giving it to them. We think that all the value is coming from object side. We're giving it the value. So think about the crazy things we do in life from this overvaluing. This is the point. Think about how much more loving we could be if we could stop being so about us and understanding things more realistically. I do not inherently exist because of not being the aggregates. So you're doing meditation. I'm not going to do it right now. So just think about it. Are you your parts? Right? Start to, am I my hand? Rinpoche did this all the time. Am I my hand? Am I my head? And then you'd find out there's no me. And then Rinpoche would put you back together, remember? And you go, but wait a minute. There's me. Am I my head? Am I my hand? Am I but I don't not exist. Remember Rinpoche? That's what he'd say. But wait a minute. But I do exist when I put all the parts back together. And where does this idea exist? As a thought in my mind of Jeff that's designated on all this stuff. God, he was good. So effective. Just brings tears to my eyes to know how effectively he taught emptiness with such simplicity. I'm studying it without simplicity now, and I'm arriving at the same ideas. Wow. Had to be not being the aggregates, not being an entity other than the aggregates. You take them all away, but there's still Jeff. When you can't find a Jeff until you have the aggregates to name Jeff. So when you separate all this stuff and the talking and the consciousness and the earth element, the water element, the wind element, fire element, and the space element that makes this all up, you take all of that away, and the consciousness, you have no consciousness. You have nothing to designate. So you can't say it's something separate. You have no I to designate without parts. But you have no consciousness. There's nothing without this that could be Jeff. So now you've got parts again that you weren't, and now you got parts again that you are. So you got to sort out what's going on here. And this is what emptiness is it's the sorting out of this. I'm not one with my parts. I'm not separate from my parts. But there's a dependent origination that's allowing me to talk right now. What is that? Not being the base of the aggregates. Like there's something able to stand on its own that's holding up all of these aggregates. Just being the basis of it. That's just holding it up. But then, anyway, not inherently based on the aggregates. Not inherently possessing the aggregates, like a possessor, an I that's a possessor. You can't find the I without the aggregates. So how could the I possess something that can't be found unless you start to see, how could you be the possessor of the thing that makes you who you are? Then is that who you are? You have to start to see it's just a mere designation on a collection. Over and over again, you find a mere designation on a collection. And a collection that from its own side doesn't have any inherent existence to have the nessness that you designate. And in this case, the I. Not inherently possessing the aggregates, not being just the composite of the aggregates, and not being the shape of the aggregates. Am I my shape? Am I my color? Am I my hand? Am I the fluid in me? Am I the air moving in and out of my lungs? Yet, by having air move in and out of my lungs and having fluid in my body and space for that stuff to move around in, and an earth element that serves as a foundation and a warmth, I have a me here that can be designated as Jeff. Designated by a thought as Jeff. Designated by your thought as Jeff. When we look at the view of the perishing aggregates, this grasping at I and mine, that's personal to self. That's grasping at self of person. But I can grasp at yourself of person too. I can grasp at, whomever's name, John Smith's self of person. But then when I grasp at them as having a true self of person, for them to have that objectively existent self of person, John Smith would have to abide in some way that was, being the aggregates, being an entity other than the aggregates, not being the aggregates, not inherently being based on the aggregates, not inherently possessing the aggregates, not being just the composite of the aggregates and not being the shape of the aggregates. So this is what we sort out. We don't sort it all out today, folks. This is information that, let me actually, I read something that's further on that I think is actually helpful for today. So for beginners, it's necessary to become acquainted with the reasoning over a long period of time before an understanding of emptiness can be generated. Okay, you would assume that. Something very cool is coming. However, reasons do not require endless establishment, because if every reason had to be established by another reason, one would never realize the main thesis. The reasons are established to a point where experience manifestly establishes them. So reasoning takes you only so far. You need to sit down, the author is saying. Meditate on this. Really, this is something you have to experience. There's no way, all the yogis say, to truly explain this emptiness. But these reasonings lead you to it so that you can. But don't think that the reasonings alone are the experience and get so caught in reasons for reasons for reasons for reasons and stacking up knowledge. Like Pabunka Rinpoche says, you could maybe even memorize all 84,000 bundles of scripture. But if you haven't analyzed them, if you haven't meditated on them, and you haven't somehow tasted them more and more intimately, even if you're correct about them, you'll forget about it and it won't mean anything to you. So this author here, Jeffrey Hopkins, and Jeffrey Hopkins' teachers are saying that sit down also, meditate, get calm abiding so that you can unite it with special insight and see emptiness. The reasons are established to a point where experience manifestly establishes them. It makes the reasons true because you've seen something directly. So now you know all those reasons are definitely true. If a person lacks this experience, it is necessary to seek other means, such as examples, to gain the necessary experience that establishes the reasons. I thought that was really profound, that the experience then establishes your reason. And that's where the real deal happens. So I haven't had that happen yet, but I know I will if I rely on this information. The Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling on Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the 5 skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajaparamita should see in this way, seeing the 5 skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. The same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics, there is no birth and no cessation, there is no impurity and no purity, there is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no eye, dhatu, up to no mind, dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind, consciousness, dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance, up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear, they transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the 3 times by means of Prajaparamita, fully awakened to unsurpassed unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequal mantra, mantra that calms all suffering, should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way: Teata om gate gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisoha. 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 Thus Shariputra, Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi, praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, good, good, O son, honorable family, thus it is, O son, honorable family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Agasamara Jasanara Samaraya Ve, Teata on Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhisoa, Papa Conchasanji, Gaide Medoji, Lobodoji, Mebadoji, Shewadoji, Dragi Baji Medubisha Danji Shedding Goria Zoha, Gerin Jaji Jewa, Damedon Nebejana Devada, Tumbadon Jimbon Zonzon Jaji, Dashi de Jandenda de Le Show. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas High, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples, as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Edam Gururana Mandalagam Niradayami. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I create by teaching the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I create by teaching the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I create by teaching the Dharma, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sanje janan zaji janan na shanje bade dani jasu ji dagi ji 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 be sanan ji shala benje sanje juba sho sanje jadan zaji janan na shanje bade dani jasu ji dagi ji 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 be sanan ji shala benje sanje juba sho sanje jadan zaji janan la Shanje badu dani jazuji dagi jiji ji bezananji trala benji zanje drubarjo. Enthused by great compassion, you taught the Immaculate Dharma to dispel all perverted views. To you, the Buddha, Gautama, I pay homage. If you are attached to this life, you're not a spiritual practitioner. If you're attached to samsara, you have no renunciation. If you're attached to your own self-interest, you don't have bodhicitta. There is grasping. You do not have the view. Okay. So great to be with all of you. I just absolutely, so happy we're talking also about emptiness. And, as I said to you before, I was always a little concerned about talking about emptiness, but then you just say emptiness and then everybody thinks you're talking about things don't exist. You're talking about nihilism in some way. So it comes out of my mouth enough, the word emptiness, correct view of emptiness, that if I don't expand upon it and somebody on some application is just listening, then they're going to think I'm talking about nothing matters, nothing exists, it's all just nothing, and do what you want. And there is a school that feels this way, but it is not our school. This is the nihilist school, the nihilist tradition. Things are what they are, man. There's just no rhyme or reason, Don't look for it. You do whatever you do, and it's not going to matter, And this is kind of like the way we all kind of think a little in our, it's okay. It's fine. It's all right. I could just kind of just say that. It's fine. It makes sense that I behaved we do this. Like we don't think our actions have consequences. Because if we really believed they did, we wouldn't do what we do. So we have a lot, we have a lot of nihilistic tendencies. And this is why it's presented in the tenet systems. Not, again, as an opponent like, oh, the dumb nihilists. It's because you're a dumb nihilist, Jeff. You just aren't even paying enough attention to see that you are. So, this is what I want to slowly present in the coming weeks, years, will be that kind of idea of the tenets in a way that really you can work with it and do something with it and make it more than a buzzword, this emptiness, nature of reality, dependent origination. This dependent origination is just everything that's arising, is a sign of its emptiness. Everything you see is a sign of emptiness. Everything you see, because it's all a dependent arising. But not me. Can't be that. This is how we feel. But not me. I'm a nihilist. No, I'm not. I'm a Madhyamaka Prasangika. I'm the high view. But then sometimes not me. This is that not me, the not like thinking it outside, the naturally occurring one is the one we're fighting. And that's a tough one. So let's go right to the 6 sufferings in the Lamrim Chema. We're in the medium scope section. Buddha stated this is the superior truth of suffering. And in the Lamrim Chema, we have 8 sufferings explained. We went through quite a bit. Suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death, suffering of meeting with the unpleasant, separating from the pleasant, not getting what you want, and the suffering of the appropriated aggregates being body and mind, the form and consciousness, things that make us us. Unless you think the make us us is something else. You have to decide that for yourself, what that means. Just start to think about what makes you you. That's what Nagarjuna is asking. That's what Chandrakirti and Tsongkhapa are asking. What makes you capital U. What's the reason you have such a big U? Why? Is it reasonable to have such a big U? Are there reasons that make that reasonable? So this is what we're getting at. So when we say, okay, life is great, life is good. Well, is that a reasonable statement at its core? And Buddha says, well, you do have suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Are those good? Because those are life. That's what life's about. You're born, now you have life. People who have a life die. So when you're talking about life is good, people who have a life are separated from the unpleasant, meeting with the separating from the pleasant and meeting with unpleasant, not getting what they want throughout this gap of birth and death. And all the while, this gap, your birth, you're ejected from your last life's conscious, body, the house. And now you have this birth, you have these appropriated things coming on, your body and mind, all the sufferings. Think about all the suffering that occurs in the gap. So is life good? Buddha wants to know. And not Buddha says it could be the best. You're just not making it good. And this is the clear distinction. Buddhism's not negative. Buddhism's super positive, saying like, oh, hey, by the way, like what you're doing is way, way, way dissatisfactory to me. Because let me tell you why. Because I figured out like that stuff I thought too was pretty good, pretty fine. Life is good. Really wasn't. And then I found out this next level that you can all have where life really is good. Why? Because it's not contaminated. Okay. If it's contaminated, you're going to have among the three types of suffering. And these types of suffering are fitting in, depending on what, to all of them. But in the desire realm where we are, we have all three types of suffering. We have all of these things. So it's really relevant to us. And that's why they aren't writing at, stuff that's so applicable to the hungry ghost. Right? These authors are writing at human beings. So the relatability, Buddha was speaking with human beings, So Buddha knew what, the nature of our sitch was. We know in the formless realm, you don't have suffering of change or suffering of suffering. But there's a lot more of us hanging around that, can be talked to and hear a sound, whereas in the formless realm, that's not happening. So if the Buddha's going to talk to you, in a place where you can hear a sound, the Buddha's going to talk about the stuff you're going through. So, don't apply this to everything that can happen in samsara all the time. Know that some places are a little better than what we have, but they're impermanent. They'll change and you'll get a hell realm from there. You'll get better than we have and then all of a sudden be in a slug. So the six sufferings, the suffering, they're really faults of having this problem of a self-grasping I that gives rise to this being forced again and again and again without any freedom into a set of aggregates, into a set of body and mind parts that suffer. So let's look at some things. I'm going to read this whole section because this is, I think, this is what 8 sufferings, 6 suffering, 3 sufferings. This is the one that, everybody's affected differently. But this is the one that seems a little more subtle and in meditation starts to be effective. So the fault of uncertainty, the fault of insatiability, the fault of casting off bodies repeatedly, the fault of repeated birth, the fault of repeatedly going from high realms to the low realms, and the fault of having no companions. So it says reflection on the 6 types of suffering. Mahamati's clear words, explanation of Nagarjuna's friendly letter says there are 7 types of suffering, but since the last merely restates each of the faults, you should contemplate 6 here. So I just read that for the sake of reading that. I believe friendly letter is Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. I would assume. If I'm wrong, let the lightning bolt land. But I would assume that's what it's talking about here. So the fault of uncertainty. As you pass through cyclic existence, close relatives such as your father and mother become enemies in other lifetimes. So strike right at the heart if you're Tsongkhapa. Bring up somebody who's so close to you and say, you're, in the, especially, some in the West have, problems with parents and so forth. But in this tradition, parents were the gods of the child, right? So now Tsongkhapa says, okay, well, that person is going to be your enemy. How do you feel? How does that make your heart feel? How does that make you feel when you look at your wife, your daughter, your husband, your dog, all these beings that you love so much? How does that make your mind feel to know they may kill you in your next life because of their uncertainty and your uncertainty? Because you aren't permanently together the way we feel. When we start to feel connections with loved ones, we feel this kind of identity that's created between us that will always be the way that we think it is. But unfortunately, it would be a little less depressing if that was true, no? If somehow, like, well, the people that I loved, like, it was like almost heaven, but rebirth, where I got to be with over and over again, certainly those that I love so much and have these relationships. But then now I come to find that I look at the person next to me and I see that I could harm them. I think that's more effective. I could really hurt them in my next life because of my self-grasping ignorance and self-cherishing attitude. A crime must be stopped. And the only way I can stop it, the only way I can definitely not hurt the person I love more than anything in this world, is to become liberated. You see how emptiness and compassion start to kind of link up. Wow, they're just so skilled at affecting a mind if you let it affect your mind. Just let it happen. You pass through cyclic existence. Close relatives such as your father and mother become enemies in other lifetimes, while enemies become close relatives. Think about the person who you find the most distasteful. And then realize that you just might very well spend the rest of your next life with them as your closest companion. And that's how certain that enemy is to you. That's how ignorant we are to think that they're really an enemy. And in your previous life, if you've done that kind of complex meditation, they've certainly been your loved one. And now you've forgotten and you just see them incorrectly through the foggy lenses of the afflictions. Similarly, your father becomes your son, your father, your mother becomes your wife. That's one to shake you up. Lama Tsongkhapa is not just writing words. He's shocking us. He's saying, yeah, you're going to have relations with your mom. Ugh, right? He's trying to let us know how disgusting cyclic existence is. It's not this thing we're bathing around in and thinking is always the way that it is. Since there's nothing but a succession of such transformations, there is nothing you can count on. This is the first point. The friendly letter says, okay, I'm looking it up now. I'm sure it's Nagarjuna, but how could I say the wrong thing about Nagarjuna? It's got to be, right? Everybody agree? What's the bet? I don't know, betting. Oh, it's in Sanskrit. That doesn't help.
You got it.
Okay, good. All right. I feel better. I hear you got it. Okay, for those in cyclic existence, there are no certainties because fathers, yeah, this is definitely, yep. Because fathers become sons, mothers become wives, enemies become friends, and the converse happens as well. And I'll just read right to it's a little tiny bit more. Even in this life, enemies become friends and vice versa. So we see in this lifetime it happening all the time. Complete polar opposite things happen in relationships. And it's so strange. But when they weren't their polar opposite, they felt so stable. So think about how, if it's so unstable just in this one little life, think about beginningless lives. Think about the instability, and it just starts to crumble. Even in this life, enemies become friends and vice versa. The Tantra requested by Sabahu says, within a short space of time, an enemy can become a friend and a friend can become an enemy. Likewise, either one may become indifferent, while those who are indifferent may become enemies or intimate friends. Knowing this, the wise never form attachments. The wise never form attachments. They give up the thought of delighting in friends and are content to focus on virtue. By meditating on this, you should check the arising of attachment and hostility that come from distinguishing between friends and enemies. Be aware that among the phenomena of cyclic existence, absolutely nothing can be trusted, become disenchanted. And I don't know if you all just caught what I caught, but oh my word, he's talking about how you start meditating on bodhicitta right here. Equalizing friends, enemies, and neutrals. In the medium scope section, look at the attachment that comes from discriminating between friends and aversion that comes from discriminating between friends and enemies. The primer is being put there so that you can meditate in the future on equanimity of friends, enemies, and neutrals. So you can get an equal willingness to benefit friends, enemies, and neutrals. There's a foundation set here because it shows you that this discrimination doesn't even make sense because of the uncertainty of karma. And the uncertainty, I mean, of samsara. Karma, sure, that's fine too. Really amazing. We'll table this amazingness. But you just, yeah, we're really fortunate. And I hope that if this information isn't moving you, give it some time. Be patient. You know, and those of you who are like, oh, he must have just be this academic person. I have a high school diploma. I'm 51. And I didn't like school very much. I was going to be a rock singer. And this stuff had such an effect on me that I know it a little bit now. So don't think that you can't know this stuff because of something you have against books or learning. Or prayer for the flourishing of Jitsongkhapa's teachings. Though he's the father, producer of all conquerors, as a conqueror's son, he produced the thought of upholding the conqueror's Dharma in infinite worlds. Through this truth, may the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. When in the presence of Buddha Indraketu, he made his vow, the conqueror and his offspring praised his powerful courage. Through this truth, may the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. That the lineage of pure view and conduct might spread, he offered a white crystal rosary to the sage, who gave him a conch and prophesied, through this truth, may the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. His pure view, free of eternity or destruction, free of permanence or annihilism. His pure meditation cleansed of dark fading and fog. His pure conduct praised according to conqueror's wishes. May the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. Learned, since he extensively sought out learning. Reverent, rightly applying it to himself. Good, dedicating all for beings and doctrine. May the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. Through being sure that all scriptures, definitive and interpretive, were without contradiction, advice for one person's practice, he stopped all misconduct. May the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. Listening to explanations of the three Pitakas, realized teachings, practicing the three highest higher trainings, his skilled and accomplished life story is amazing. May the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. Outwardly calmed and subdued by the hearer's conduct, inwardly trusting in the two stages practice, he allied without clash the good paths of Sutra and Tantra. May the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. Combining voidness explained as the causal vehicle with great bliss achieved by method, the effect vehicle, heart essence of 80,000 Dharma bundles. May the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. By the power of the ocean of oath-bound doctrine protectors, like the main guardians of the three beings paths, the quick-acting Lord Vaishravana Karmayana, may the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. In short, by the lasting of glorious gurus' lives, by the earth being full of good, learned, reverend holders of the teaching, and by the increase of power of its patrons, may the conqueror Losang's teachings flourish. Wow. I can't get over the point. I mean, I've seen it a million times, but I never saw it in there. Just such a incredible graduated stages of the path that really, if you follow them to a T, it's just going to be easier for you. Really will. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Azandrapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Enthused by great compassion, you taught the immaculate Dharma to dispel all perverted views. To you, the Buddha Gautama, I pay homage. If you're attached to this life, you're not a spiritual practitioner. If you're attached to samsara, you have no renunciation. If you're attached to your own self-interest, you have no bodhicitta. There is grasping, you do not have the view. Any mistakes that I've made during this teaching, may they be purified by the recitation of the Vajrasattva mantra, imagining Vajrasattva in the space in front of you, inseparable from your root Lama, inseparable from Khyentse Geshe Wandak, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whomever you imagine and consider your root Lama. And now imagining that white, red, and blue light rays and nectars transform into white ohms, red ahs, and blue homs, shower down on you and all sentient beings, purifying your body, speech, and mind, respectively. Yours and all sentient beings. Om benza sata samaya mana palaya benza sata zena vajija dida meva vazu dogaya meva vazu bogaya meva anurada meva vazavazidi mebra jazavaka mazuja megidam triankoro om ha 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 ho bhagavan zavatata gata benza mememoka benza bava mahasamaya sapa ah om ve. May we always be protected by Paul Dan Lama. Jo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Rulurung Jo Jo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Rulurung Jo Jo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Rulurung Jo Jo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Rulurung Jo Jo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Ridunjo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Ridunjo Rama Jo Rama Jo Jo Rama Tunjo Kalarajemo Rama Wajadaja Tunjo Ridunjo I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the three times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness, all powerful Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara is end. The funny thing about epiphanies that we have when we're reading a text, it's so many times you realize, oh yeah, I had that before, but it didn't sink in. Because I'm thinking to myself, I must have seen this before. How could I have not seen this? And I bet I may have even said it when we were in the source of all my good teaching, because there's some like, I don't know, like connected memory happening. It's just funny how our minds work. A complex yogi, this is a prayer for Khyentse Geshe Wandak Rinpoche, who passed away March 6, 2022. And may we have no obstacles in completing the filling of his stupa over the next few days. A complex yogi poses as a simple monk. Homage to Khyentse Geshe Wandak Rinpoche, our precious spiritual friend who is inseparable from Aryatara. I fully prostrate, covering as many atoms of the earth as possible to your pure body, speech, mind, and enlightened activities. I offer to you drinking water, bathing water, flowers, incense, candles, music, scented water, incense, candles, scented water, music, food and music purified by Om Ahom. The rarity of having 1 million wish-fulfilling gems is a common occurrence compared to meeting with a holy teacher like you who placed the complete path to Buddhahood in our childlike hands. Just like a teacher who came to Tibet with a lamp to dispel the darkness of ignorance, you, kind abbot, arrived in the West with a lineage purer than a diamond and begged us never to be satisfied with partial instructions. The teachings of the extensive deeds and profound view lineages flowed from your lips like nectar from our ears that elucidated the teachings for beings of three capacities. Now the sound has stopped. All composite things are impermanent. You told us that all your teachers passed away and understood the sadness, entreating us to continue our studies. The Buddha does not wash away the negativities of beings, nor does he remove their miseries by his hands. His spiritual realizations are not transferred to them. It is by teaching the truth of suchness that beings are liberated. We are not prepared to take this difficult journey to the highest goodness of Buddhahood without your continued guidance. Sadness in our hearts would be too overwhelming. May you swiftly return to this world and take care of us in all of our lives, wherever we may be, never leaving our hearts and crowns. May all sentient beings perfectly realize renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view of emptiness, so they know who you really are. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your patient listening. I hope this has some effect on you, and I hope that you can take these teachings and know more and more about them and apply them to your minds. And you'll find that your mind gets a little easier to deal with if you do. Thank you. See you all next time. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, everybody, also.